Welcome to Atheists Talk for February 2010. My name is Mike Haubrich, and I am here with two of my fellow atheists to examine whether there are any connections between race and IQ. Greg Laden is a biological anthropologist and a science blogger writing at scienceblogs.com. He writes about everything but specializes in human evolution, race, and gender. He's been a frequent guest on the Atheists Talk radio show. Stephanie Zvan has been the host of the Atheist Talk radio show and blogs at Almost Diamonds on a variety of topics, including the ways in which people misinterpret the world around them. She has a degree in psychology. The three of us blog at Quiche Moraine, and along with Stephanie, I was a host of the Atheist Talk radio show. Every few years, a new book comes out that purports to show that IQ is a strongly inherited trait, and that therefore differences in intelligence ranges observed in the United States are attributable to genetic differences between the races. The conclusion reaches something along the lines of a resigned hug or a shrug. What can we possibly hope to do about all the differences in income and social outcomes, and how can we change genetics? We are here tonight to poke holes in such arguments. With all those books out there and studies cited, why are you trying to tell us that race and IQ aren't related?
Yeah, no, that's a good question. I think that part of the reason why people don't understand or don't accept the idea that race and IQ are not related is because we're told constantly that they are. And the people who are interested in this topic or have been in the past interested in this topic have settled it a long time ago. And to be honest, I think that within the social sciences, there's a fairly large number of people who are afraid that it might be true. They're afraid that there might be a validity to the race concept, and there may be a validity to genetically based racial differences in IQ, and they just don't pick this up as a research topic, and they don't go after it. So I think that there's, and the books that we see are almost always not produced by biological anthropologists. They're almost not produced by people who are studying culture. They're almost not produced by neurobiologists. They're produced by other sorts of researchers that have other sorts of interests in mind, and the research is funded in other ways than most research is usually funded. So I think it's a popular topic that will always sell a book, you know. And in fact, it isn't even all that popular of a topic in some ways. I mean, there is only one book every year or two that comes out. It's not like exercise,
Sure.
and diet.
Sure. So let's move on to some of that research and start with some of the basics of intelligence quotient. What is IQ?
IQ started out as a test that a Frenchman named Binet put together to study very young boys and to find out which boys among them would benefit by schooling. And it's actually very much stayed in that strain, even though that's not what people called it. Binet himself objected to it being called an intelligence test, or an intelligence quotient being what it measures. Essentially what it is a measure of how well a person will do in a modern institutional setting. A school, some workplaces, that sort of thing. How well they'll deal with the healthcare system, which could be potentially attributed to intelligence, but there's not a lot about what is studied that is necessarily intelligence. It's just they've put together a test, they've put together several tests, they've made sure that the tests all work together and give more or less the same results, and they've called the similarities between those tests intelligence. They haven't called it test-taking ability, they've called it intelligence. And so it's been very much, they have used the success in predicting school grades, how well you get paid, how many widgets you put out on the production line, as ways to validate the test. But again, those aren't things that require just intelligence. They all require various abilities to navigate a culture and to navigate the expectations of the setting.
So, so a lot of people have this impression, though, that they have this fixed number that they're assigned at conception, you know, what their IQ is, you know. And what does that really mean? You know, it's like, say, President Obama has a 147 IQ. Does it really mean a number, or how is that number? What's the norm that it's based on?
Every few years, large group of people are given the tests, and they look at the range of how these people, and actually I'm not sure and really need to look into how these people are chosen, but they look at the ranges of the scores of these people, the midpoint in the distribution is 100. If you score above that, you get a higher IQ. If you score below that, you get a lower IQ. And it's all based on how far from that midpoint you are.
Okay.
Which actually brings up an interesting point, and that is the IQ test is constantly calibrated and adjusted. Okay. But in the discussion of race and IQ, we'll hear about IQ numbers that are assigned to certain races or certain other groups. Recent literature, IQ has been assigned to countries, or it's been assigned to black people or to Asian people, and so on. And those IQ numbers for the sort of basic current race model in the US, if you read the literature, the assertion is that the African people have on average an IQ of 70, and African Americans have an IQ of 85, and white Americans have an IQ of 100. And it turns out that that is exactly what you would predict if you have a certain admixture of European and Africans in African American people, none of which is true. And the IQ data that are being used to make those assertions are old tests that were never adjusted properly, and they're being compared to modern tests, and they were never administered properly. So despite the fact that IQ tests are calibrated and regularized and done a certain way, there are examples of old IQ data that no one should ever accept as valid. The tests were done wrong, they were bogus tests, they were done for the wrong reasons, and they were never adjusted. But those numbers, if they demonstrate lower IQs of African people or African American people, are still used in literature unadulterated today, which brings us to the question of why are you doing this?
Right.
In my mind.
Yeah.
Another thing, Greg notes that these are constantly recalibrated. If a modern American, if an American from 100 years ago were to take an IQ test today, they would score as functionally retarded even if they scored at 100 on the original IQ test. So it's unlikely that our genetics have changed quite that much in the last 100 years, so there's probably something else going on affecting those scores.
Right. Somewhere out there, there's a graveyard full of short, stupid people. Because our society who never bred, and they all died before they bred. And because our society has gotten taller and has gotten smarter, and both height, stature, and IQ. If you ask anyone, well, why are people different heights? They'll say, well, it's genetic. I read it in my textbook. Height is genetic, but it isn't. If height is genetic, then there will be a lot of dead short people that never reproduced.
Right.
If intelligence was genetic, there will be a lot of dead low IQ people that never reproduced. A lot of them. I mean, for a 30-point increase in IQ and a 25% increase in stature since 1900, you'd have to have a lot of people. Yeah.
So you're arguing that IQ is a useless measure?
It's not a useless measure. It does actually measure how well people do in these institutions to a certain extent. But one of the things that you have to realize when you're talking about the fact that they validated these tests to workplaces and to schools and so on and so forth, is that racism isn't lacking in any of these institutions. So you have to be aware that if there is racism in the places where you're measuring success, that racism gets incorporated in the test. In order for the test to be valid, it has to match that institution.
Okay.
Right.
So let's get on to race, since you brought out some of the differences on there. I've heard that race is an arbitrary classification, right? So what is wrong with that? Are implications of race-based research of which we should be aware?
Yeah, I mean, race as a self-identified ethnic category that could tell someone something about your genetic background is not necessarily a useless concept. Not necessarily, but mostly doesn't seem to have a lot of function. The idea of races themselves are biologically equivalent to subspecies. And zoologists have used the subspecies concept in looking at animals for 100 years, and over the last 50 of those years have more or less thrown it out because it doesn't work in most cases. And in humans, it's pretty much not a useful concept. There are not races in humans. There are clines and gradients and variations, and we have a false idea of race because of geographical movements of people and over-categorizing people. Okay, so race itself is kind of an invalid concept. to begin with. However, people often ask, what is racism? Is there a function of racism? Does racism have a role in our culture, in our society? And I like to sort of tease people by saying that there's actually a gene for racism. And the gene for racism is a gene that determines someone's skin color. So your racism is a function of the gene in my body, determining my skin color.
Okay.
Okay. And in that sense, race is an extremely valid and valuable concept because people will treat each other differently in that way. But do people's genes divide up by races in a way that can shape their brains at birth to be different on these IQ tests? Requires several, we can talk more about the details, but it requires several steps, all of which are contrary to what we know about genes and brains. So it's a sort of a fetishized fantasy concept, the idea that races are solid categories and that races have categories, have characteristics where we can look at someone's melanin count and determine how their brain works.
And most of the current information that you see out there, current studies that purport to support race, are studies in which they've taken a population from over here and a population from over here, and they've tested hundreds of genetic markers to find out which ones they have in common and which ones they don't. And they found the ones that actually group them, and they plot them on a map, and you can see that this group is over here and this group is over here, and there's this big swath in the middle. Mm-hmm. But if you look at anything where they take all the people in the middle, you get a broad swath. You get no breaks in it. You get, unless you know where somebody is, unless you already know which group somebody's supposed to be into, they do a nice little color coding for you so you can still see that they break down. You can't find where this group ends and where this group starts.
It's almost like the concept of a ring species in a way, in a sense that there's like you can take a look at this block here and this block here, but there's a gradient in between rather than a discrete break.
Right. Yeah, I mean, another way of thinking about it is that, and that's absolutely right, and genetic variation arises as mostly irrelevant novelty randomly across space. Mm-hmm. Unless you're near Chernobyl, your chance of a novel genetic change, which is usually a irrelevant change, arise randomly across space, and not even organized by race. So any given gene will potentially have variation across space that is based upon geography, assuming people don't go anywhere, mm-hmm. except for to their neighboring village to marry. Okay, so the best predictor of genetic variation is how far you are geographically, and it works very nicely. So you can really think about the genetics different. The genes are a marker for where you are. Genes are genetic variation is an odometer. Okay, in a sense, it's like a GPS system.
Okay.
So you can predict someone's geography based upon the random genetic variation, or you can predict the random genetic variation on the basis of geography. But you can't predict one set of genes on the basis of another, except for in the rare cases of a few genes that might be somehow correlated in space. And offhand, I can't think of any examples for humans of genes that have adaptive function where two sets of genes with the same adaptive function, with different adaptive functions, are also correlated across space, where we actually know the gene and can identify them.
Sure. We're about halfway through the show. We do have some time to talk about more of this research. What about brain size differences, a measure of IQ potential, and how they relate? Because you mentioned something about being able to predict some areas and others. Well,
just quickly, I think the brain size is a good example of how the race-based science works. Okay. Throughout the literature, you'll see the assertion that there's a difference in brain size where Asian people have larger brains than Caucasian people, Oriental people, I should say. I'll use the words that the scientists use. Oriental people have slightly larger brains than Caucasian people, who have significantly larger brains than African people. And there's a correlation in IQ that goes, I already mentioned the IQ numbers mm-hmm. come from bogus sources, so they're not real, but they're correlated. The brain data come from 20 or 30 data sets that are, 80% of the data sets are what we call perimeter data. Perimeter is where the measurement has been taken around the outside of the skull, and that is used to estimate the brain size inside by subtracting the skull thickness and then using a formula where you take the circumference of a circle, but the circle is shaped differently, shaped like a brain.
Sure.
Okay. The perimeter data come from Army conscripts who have been stripped, deloused, shaved head, and then the tape goes around the head, and someone yells out the number, and they write it down next to their name, and that's their hat size. Okay, that's the data. And if you look at the head size differences across the different populations, you'll find that they don't vary very much, overlap mostly. But the brain size data are different. And the reason is because Philip Rushton, who did this research, subtracted the skull thickness differentially across the races. He's had thicker skulls assigned to black people and the thinnest skulls assigned to Asian people based upon hand-picked skulls. The African skulls that are used to calibrate the black person data are a proto-human hominid from Africa, not a Homo sapiens. A series of skulls that are not, or they might be a Homo sapiens depending on where you want to draw the line, but they're very early skulls and they don't reflect the African variation. African variation in skull thickness is great. Lots and lots of Africans have very thin skulls, some have thicker skulls, just like any other population. And he specifically took the thickest available skulls from Africa and used them to adjust the data. So all three circumferences are reduced to account for the skull. Asians are reduced a little, Caucasians are reduced a little more, Africans are reduced a whole whopping bunch. If you undo that, they all overlap again and the brain size differences go away.
So Rushton, did he have a particular agenda that he was trying to achieve here?
Yes, he had obviously a racist political agenda he was trying to achieve and still continues to do so. And well, you want to talk about how the literature comes from
version. There is a modern version of the brain size differences in which they are measuring sizes of different pieces of the brain now that they can do more scanning. The people involved in this research don't necessarily have these same kinds of agendas, which is very convenient for the people who do, actually. What they are doing is they are using a lot of very new tools, and they are coming up with this evidence at the same time that they are trying to validate their tools. So in order to do that, they have to look at already existing research on IQ differences among races. They have to look at already existing information on brain sizes between, and so they're validating the tools that they're using by making sure that those tools more or less come up with the same results.
Seeking what they call like an external validity.
Yep, and they have
prior data.
They have also a certain problem that there are lots of different little pieces of the brain to look at, and so they'll test lots and lots and lots at once, and they will find one over here that for this group of people seems to vary pretty well. When they redo that research in another group, which they don't do as often as they could, perhaps because it's very expensive research, brain scanning is not cheap, they don't find that same area of the brain correlates with this different group of people. It's a statistical artifact. You know, you test enough areas of the brain, you're going to find one that more or less matches your data.
So, like intelligence related to like the number of folds you have in your cerebellum. It's like there's more. I don't understand how
people often have said that, but the folds in your cerebellum basically are there because your brain is too big for your head.
Right.
You know, if you look at a cat brain, it's nice and smooth. You know, because they don't have. Their brains aren't very big, and they don't have a problem with getting their brain inside their head. There are brain differences that probably are related to intelligence, and one that is fairly consistent is, you know, how good are your helper cells, and how many of them are there? These cells that help the neurons operate, glial cells, and that sort of thing. If you've got a lot of those, your brain's going to be a little bit quicker, and in fact, on various tests you can provide, people do have faster responses to things and so on. The brain differences between people that I think are really interesting and astounding and large are gender differences in brains. And that is where basically you have male and female differences that are caused by severe damage that happens to male brains because of testosterone.
Okay.
And they cause males to not be able to multiprocess, for example, most males. So, you know, when you're, I mean, this is just, you know, this could be a whole other show on gender differences, but those differences are so much larger. And cultural differences in what people learn to do, and developmental differences have to do with nutrition. There are many, many, many sources of variation in intelligence, many sources, and they're large. And they're not, and genetics might be a source, but if it is, it's very hard to find the signal of genetic variation among all the other variation, all the other causes of variation.
So how does this all relate to the racist aspect? Because there's been a lot of talk lately, especially on the blogs that we discussed earlier, about how this all ties together and what's being attempted by the people that are doing these studies. Do you think? what's the motivation? Are they just trying to justify racism, or what is it that they're trying to do?
Well, as I said before, there is a group that is out there, and they're trying to develop these tools, and they're really cool tools. And if they mean something, that tells us a lot about people, and we get a lot of information from those tools. And so they're very gung-ho. I mean, they're people, saying we have this great statistical tool, we can now start to predict something. We have this great scanner, we can now find out what actually makes our brain tick. So there is that group as well, and it's good to not lose sight of that and not lose confidence in those researchers, even though what they're doing is very new and not very well validated.
Yeah, I agree. I think that there's a lot of neurobiology and psychometric research that is proceeding. I think there's too much consideration of the race model within that paradigm, and they don't need it. Mm-hmm. They don't need it. They can just leave it aside and continue without it, and it wouldn't hurt their research at all. Then there are another set of, the famous book that came out several years ago that kind of focuses debate was the bell curve.
Right.
And the bell curve was a book that said, we don't know what causes differences between races, but we know that they're persistent and they won't go away, and they're causing our society to spend more and to have all kinds of trouble. And we're not going to say what the cause of these differences are, but there's an appendix in the back of the book that does. And that appendix is a version of Philip Rushton's race book, in which I described the brain size differences and the race and the IQ differences and so on. So there's an old-fashioned race-based bioanthropology that is out there that is being fed into a literature being funded by right-wing organizations that want there to be a race model, mm-hmm. and that's parallel to and separate from, but very much interconnected at certain levels with the psychometric data. I mean, if you talk to psychometric people, they will refer to the Rushton data set as being the validation of the brain size differences. Okay, if you look at any of the literature on brain size, there's be dozens and dozens and dozens of citations. Rushton took about 20 studies, put them into one study, reinterpreted the data, and put them into one study. Someone will cite not only Rushton's, but all of the original ones as all separate studies. And so there's an old-fashioned race-based bioanthropology going on there that is continuing. It's got its own reasons for existing, and it sort of feeds and supports. It's like your cousins that are in the mafia. You're not, but you've got these cousins.
Sure.
And you're just going to mention them now and then, and everyone is going to just get in line, but you're not really with them.
Sure.
But they're your relatives, and they're nearby, and they're ready to help at any time.
And the other thing to note about recycling all of this information is every time they do that, every time they do a review of this, every time they do a meta-analysis of several of these studies, that ends up with a date that makes it look much more modern than the research actually is, suggests that it's done with much more modern techniques, suggests that it's done with more modern controls and with less background racism in the society.
But it's still the same old stuff.
But it's still exactly the same research.
I also wanted to get into studies that have claimed to discover what they call a gene for intelligence, or at least one of them. Are they credible, and what do they tell us?
The studies for the genes for intelligence are very much like the brain scan studies, except that the people who are doing the genetic research are being much better about replicating their studies. So they'll take a large group, they'll look at lots and lots of genes, they'll figure out which ones correlate or seem to correlate with intelligence in this particular group of people. And then they will take it to a different group of people, and they discover that no, they haven't found the gene. And they've done this several times, and one of the reviews of the literature that I saw liked to talk about how that meant they were getting closer to finding the gene. And no, that's not what they're doing. What they're doing is validating the fact, giving lots and lots of demonstrations of the fact that you get statistical anomalies when you do that kind of research. So now the model seems to be, maybe we won't find it in one gene. It'll have to be combinations of genes.
It's similar to the gene for sex determination in mammals, which is another topic of interest. There isn't one, and everyone will insist that there is one. If you go to a parking lot and shoot a shotgun into every single car randomly, you'll break all the cars, and you can look at where you shot the car and what's wrong with the car now. if you know nothing about cars, and you can start to figure out how cars must work. You hit them in a certain place, they explode. Hit them in a certain place, the radio doesn't work anymore. Okay, but you'll never be able to engineer a car based upon how you broke it with a shotgun. Okay, you'll never be able to really build a car based on that information. You're never going to be able to build a brain on the basis of broken brains. Okay, so when you have a gene that is a gene for a language or something that's basically an allele that is faulty, that produces a protein that doesn't function properly, and people develop in a way that is not typical and results in deficiencies in language or deficiencies in intelligence, that is not a gene for intelligence. This is a gene that's broken. And it's like shooting a shotgun into a car. It breaks a bunch of stuff. Every single gene that does something does many things. Every single trait that's genetic is affected by many genes. There are no exceptions to that, really. There are a few. There's 10, 20, or 30 exceptions. Those are the textbook cases of genes that we know about. You know, wrinkled peas.
Sure.
Okay? Most things are not wrinkled peas. So the broken gene model it's just a way of vaguely understanding how things kind of work. We now know, though, from the way neurons develop and the way brains develop, that there can't be a gene for intelligence. It isn't. You can look all you want, okay, but there just can't be one, because that's not how brains develop. It just doesn't work that way. So there can't be even a set of genes for intelligence that are just a small number that we can easily map. And again, as I said before, the other confounding effects on intelligence, for 1.5 million years, our species and our ancestor species have been passing on their intelligence and becoming intelligent, sentient adults through the process of learning and acculturation, built on a basic, simple biological process of building extra brain tissue.
We've got about a minute and a half left.
And so there's so many things that cause variation in our intelligence that are known to be not genetics, and genes can't do it.
Right.
That's our conclusion there.
Cooked food would be one of them.
Cooked food.
Yeah. I mentioned that because you've done a lot of study on that as well. So, we don't have much time. Would you like to just wrap up with what you want people to take away from watching the show?
What the single thing that I would really like people to understand is that it's not enough to just have lots and lots of data out there. All of that data has to be good in order for the premise to be valid. And this is one that has a lot of steps in it that all need to be supported in order for the overall conclusion to be true.
When someone tells you that you're not being scientific if you don't accept the race model, check your wallet.
Before you plop down the money for the book?
Just make sure your wallet's still in your pocket.
Yeah. Well, I really appreciate you guys coming on the show with me. It was a lot of fun. And again, it's like I like the 1 hour on the show, on the radio show. Half hour, it just doesn't really seem like very much time. We do appreciate the audience watching the show. We are the Minnesota Atheists. We're listening to Greg Laden and Stephanie Zvan, and I'm Mike Haubrich. We blog at Quiche Moraine. We are members of the Minnesota Atheists. If you would like to learn more about the Minnesota Atheists, please give us a call on the number that's on the screen, and we'll be glad to send out this newsletter. It's got the information on it, and I'd like to thank you again. Have a great evening.